Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, good evening, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Chizito. On Spectrum tonight, Vision 2040. Our Ugandan youths on board as this ambitious plan is launched. Uganda has launched an ambitious plan to transform its economy and other aspects of life with the unveiling of the Vision 2040, whose theme is a transformed Ugandan society from a peasant to a modern and prosperous country within 30 years. Under the plan, it is envisaged that the country will graduate into the middle income segment by 2017 and reach a per capita income of $9,500 US, which is about 25 million shillings for each household by the year 2040. This vision is conceptualized around strengthening the fundamentals of the economy to harness the abundant opportunities around the country. The vision says that in order to succeed, the average GDP growth will have to be consistent at around 8.2% each year. The vision implementation will be the responsibility of every citizen, those in government, the private sector, civil society, political organizations, and all other organized institutions. However, it will be spearheaded by President Yoweri Museveni. The plan will be implemented in line with the Comprehensive National Development Plan framework. Many other plans have been designed in the past to deal with issues articulated in this vision, but the set targets were never actually achieved. Rampant corruption, politicization of the vision, lazy and poorly facilitated public servants are among the hurdles that many people are pointing at, likely to affect this ambitious and yet well-intended plan. Now, the youth are required to play a critical part in realizing this vision. And tonight, we look at their views and how they are likely to contribute to this worthy cause. Our guests tonight, Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, Executive Director at the Agency for Transformation, also an NRM supporter. You're most welcome, Mr. Rwakakamba.
Thank you, Edmund, and good evening, dear listeners and viewers.
Viewers, because we're also on the internet, you can access a video of Spectrum of YouTube. We're also joined by Mr. Ahmed Hadji, Executive Director at the African Youth Development Link. You're most welcome, Mr. Hadji.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, dear listeners.
We expect to be joined as well by Mr. Vincent Mayanja, Deputy Secretary General of the Democratic Party. Morrison, what are the chances this plan will succeed? You've looked at it with its ambitions, taking our GDP from $560 to $9,050, $9,500 by 2040. How realistic is it?
Yeah, how realistic it is? I think it's really a very imaginative plan, an imaginative vision, because anyway, that's how it is supposed to be. And it covers really most of the aspects that would engineer an economy to progress and get everybody prosperous, really, because it talks about aspects of infrastructure, aspects of electrification, aspects of value addition, and briefly talks about aspects of skills development. Yet I really do strongly believe that for Uganda to be where we want to be at that time, we should have a knowledge-driven economy where we have a skilled human resource that is extremely agile, that is extremely innovative, creative, that can, a population that can turn even nothing into something. And that's how countries that have leapfrogged, they have invested most of its core resources into the human resource. So now you have a country, Uganda, which is still largely nature-based, still a largely nature-based economy, and that has bedecked its hopes mostly on natural resources, especially oil and gas and minerals and timber. And you see that there is a slow transition into a knowledge economy. We appreciate, especially in the vision, that there is some serious consideration of more investment into ICTs, building an ICT hub, and building a technology center. I mean, that's really extremely very important, and if that happens, then perhaps we could move from the, we are positioned sixth number, I think 60th position in terms of GDP per capita in the world. And in Africa, we are quite down there. The first position, I think we have Luxembourg, then we have Qatar. But in Africa, you have a country like Equatorial Guinea that has about 95,000, USD per capita. So you can see that our ambition, even in 2040, is low because our ambition is at 9,500 USD. But you already have countries in Africa that are pushing, that are already around around 95, like Victoria Guinea. You have Botswana, which is around almost 30,000 per capita. You have Seychelles, which is also extremely doing very well in Africa. You have South Africa. Of course, South Africa, there are some historical reasons.
Libya.
But of course, Libya, Tunisia. But most of those countries, of course, you again look at their population, because again, per capita is that total value of GDP divided, with the population. When you get the average, that's when you have the. And the other aspect, Edmund and listeners, is you asked about can we achieve it? We also have to reconfigure our values, our value systems, the intentions, the will, the people. Are they ready? Are they, what's our work ethic, for instance? What's our belief ethic? Do we all as a country wake up in our small businesses, in our small schools, in our hospitals, waking up to achieve the one common vision where we want Uganda to be, you see? Which also brings me to the question of whether this vision 2040 is consensus driven, in the sense that it was consultative, everybody was involved. People in my small village in Nibingo, did they hold a meeting to talk about these issues that would have been infused into this grand vision? So I think, I do believe that for a vision to stand the test of time, really, it must be shared. Everybody must believe in it, and I think that will take, the role of every leader. It doesn't have to be only the president or MPs. It has to be everybody, including people in the media, including church leaders, including LC leaders, including traditional leaders. All of them be aligned to this common vision. You see, because the vision even goes beyond terms of leaders. You see, and all manifestos of political parties, of people who want to be presidents, who want to lead this country, should be aligned to such a vision, such that the measurement, the indicators of their progress every 5 years are measured with a link, to this vision.
Such as the set syllabus.
Yeah, so the vision must continue, really, and all these leaders must be measured. And the weakness, Edmund, in our previous plans, our previous visions, was that they lack a core element of monitoring results, monitoring indicators, and it is the same mistake, the same lacuna that I have seen in this also Vision 2040. It runs short of setting indicators that should be achieved, where they can say we are going to merge it into 5 months, 1 year, and 5 years. But you see, we need a grand metrics. Monitoring metrics of results, that clearly states what we would have achieved by 2040.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned quite a number of things. We'll be diving into more of the values and so on, the population and how it comes into the mix. So you talk about participation very briefly, one common vision. The Americans have a dream. They all wake up, like you said, in the morning, and they're going to build that one dream. Whether the poor or rich, they believe that one day they make that country a greater nation than it actually is. Do you think this Vision 2040 should have been fomented from the grassroots, like the Constitution was made, a commission 3 years going around the country, gathering views from people in the villages, and then pyramided it into something at the end?
Yeah, absolutely. Because if that doesn't happen, then it will sit in somewhere in the shelf and gather dust. Because people will not be bothered, people will not be concerned. So it has to be a consensus-driven vision for it to succeed.
Ahmed, talk to us about what you think could fail this vision. Well, tell us your thoughts on it, and then tell us what you think could grow.
Well, I think personally, I think it's one of those great aspirations of this country, and I think it all goes back to the assertion that Uganda as a country has did adopt in 1997, in 1999 and 2007. They did adopt a long-term development perspective in as far as planning for this nation is. You have 30 years plan, then put them down to around 10-year plan, then eventually you have 5-year plan, then you have sectoral investment plans, then you load them down to annual plans, then eventually the budgets. And then to me, you realize that the bigger question that the young people were asking as we're moving around to gather thoughts on what sort of Uganda they wanted to see in the next 50 years, they were asking us questions that we've had visions come and go. We had Vision 2025, we had Vision 2030. What happened to this vision? Like Morrison says, I think when we're interfacing with the National Planning Authority, when the Youth Vision 2062 was meeting the Vision 2040 at that level to incorporate ideas, to compare notes, they appreciated the fact that the previous visions did not take off simply because there was lack of appropriate policy, legal and institutional framework. And then they also cited issues related to the internal and the external factors, and the economic thinking then did not justify the reason as to why most of the visions did not take off at that point. So you realize that it was somewhere the historical challenges that we needed to have corrected if we gave a guarantee that this vision is going to really prepare the young people or prepare the citizens of Uganda towards progression, towards prosperity, towards transforming from the peasants to the modern class or to any sort of class we want to head, the strong middle class. But those, of course, the aspirations of this vision are very, very strong, because they are looking at a situation where the Ugandans ought to live a decent life. In other words, they need more opportunities, they need more skills that can help them go out there and test their potential, so that they're able to put food on table, so that they're able to turn the worst to better. And the aspirations within this vision that I feel better resonates with what the young people were demanding in their Vision 2062 was they were pushing for a corruption-free generation.
Vision 2060.
Exactly. Because
there is such a thing?
Yeah, there is. With the youth vision, actually, the youth vision is what they thought about this country, and it all goes back to what Morrison was telling us, and then they were also looking at a progressive development culture, and most importantly, the Ugandans were also looking at much more of a resourceful, prosperous nation that is able to appreciate that this is the direction we want to take as a country, and this is a strategy. It's by consensus. This is where we want to go as a country, from this particular direction to this direction. These are the strategies. This is how we're going to move, and then we expect the leadership and the willingness to move all these brilliant ideas in terms of vision into action. And I think when Morrison raises a question whether to what extent was this vision consultative, is it consensus driven? Do we all feel that this is the path we need to take towards defining our nation as a prosperity nation? I think in terms of the credibility and the legitimacy, I think it's so much out of touch. But nevertheless, the beauty about this ambitious, I would term it as a very ambitious plan, because I was just trying to have a conversation with many young people, and they were asking me questions who is going to move all these brilliant ideas? Because Uganda is known to have, like Morrison says, very brilliant policies, laws, and a very nice vision, but the willingness to move most of these thoughts, most of these ideas into action, into the real transformation that we're, the key word here is transformation. It ends up, like he says, it should be the other document that also, catches dust somewhere, and but by and large, it acknowledges the e-revolution, the internet, for example, which is the hallmark of our generation. We are the Facebook generation, sort of realizing that there's been a lot of, innovation and entrepreneurship that is driven by ICT. You can be here and transact with mobile technology, pay your water bills, pay your DSTV. You can pay your tuition, you can pay everything using mobile technology, and it's looking at how, it can take this sort of innovation or ICT to another level. It also acknowledges that oil as sort of a game changer. It acknowledges, we've discovered oil, but how are we going to use this oil to prepare, us as a nation towards either industrialization so that we can scale up our GDP, but most importantly, try to improve and expand the incomes within the households to something ambitiously, looking at like 9,500 US dollars. To me, I think we need to also, as economists, I think Morrison is there, should we anticipate that what would be the level of economic growth then, but then most importantly, what would be the cost of living at that time in 30 years?
Cost of living.
Yeah, so that's a very, very
massive discount.
A critical issue. But also appreciating there's so many dynamics that have featured in our global, sort of space. There's been so many dynamisms, so many opportunities, and it tries to recognize quite a number of things. But then I feel that the spirit of the vision itself it's out of context because it tells.
The spirit is out of context.
Yeah, it is.
Explain
really. Why I'm saying this because the crafters of this vision sort of they draw their spirit from the Asian tigers. They're looking at countries like Malaysia, South Korea. They're looking at these countries because remember, I think the president in his speech he was able to project that at this particular level we should be shooting to a particular point more better than Singapore. So it realizes that the whole vision of this, the bigger vision of this vision. I think we needed to appreciate the contexts within.
How should we do it? Sell more coffee or what?
Well, that's a good question. But then, you need to appreciate that, the Asian tigers, the context is different, the opportunities are different, and how do we connect it to the reality around? But I think we should have done it better if we took the vision to the people and let the people define what sort of Uganda they wanted to see.
I'll tell you how many
because why you feel connected with the constitutional process is you felt you contributed towards that process. But in a situation where you don't have consensus and you're drawing best practices that are not applicable on ground, then it's going to be another process.
Candles on a Christmas tree, totally detached.
It's just an elite capture. The few elites like Morrison are able to think about where the Uganda
knows I'm a coffee farmer.
It's really an issue because we need to appreciate. Well, we were at the same level with most of these Asian tigers. Malaysia, Singapore. We heard about all this. Like we need to appreciate what is on ground.
All right.
How can we translate our potholes into
break that egg for us? Why should we not follow Singapore? If you want us to reinvent the wheel, what should we do? Give us a pragmatic.
I think the best approach would have been getting to organize our home because there are issues that we need to work on, more especially governance-related issues. To me, I think everything rises and falls in policy.
All right.
We have so many brilliant policies, so many laws, but are we able to put whatever we put on paper into action?
Practicality. We'll talk about that in more detail. Listeners, this is Spectrum Radio tonight. Vision 2040. Are Ugandan Youths on board? As this ambitious plan is launched, our guest tonight, Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, Executive Director at the Agents for Transformation, also an NRM supporter. Mr. Vincent, he's not being able to come. Mr. Ahmed Hadji, Executive Director of the African Youth Development Link. He will be able to call in and talk to us in this discussion. Tonight, Morrison, can you give us the highlights of this? Take us through some of the highlights of this Vision 2040. We know we want our GDP per capita to rise from $560 now, or thereabouts, to $9,500. What else do we have?
Maybe just highlight on the key flagship projects that are going to be launched with this plan. One of them is a high-tech ICT city and associated ICT infrastructure across the country, large irrigation schemes in different parts of the country, phosphate industry in Tororo, 5 regional cities in Guru, Mbare, Kampala, Mbarara, and 5 strategic cities of Hoima, Nakasongola, Fort Portal, 4 international airports in Uganda, a standard gauge railway network with high-speed trains, oil refinery and associated pipeline infrastructure, multi-lane paved national roads network linking major towns, cities, and strategic locations, nuclear power and hydropower plants. We are even talking about nuclear energy, science and technology parks in each region, international and national referral hospitals in each city. So for me, these are some of the fantastic projects. But like what I said before, Edmund, is that this is for me the hard stuff, really. And this is what computer experts call the hardware. But I think the missing link in all this is the software. And that software is the people. It's the value system. You see, what values do link these people to progress.
We'll talk about the value system. I mean, you mentioned nuclear. Some of these flagship projects are really outstanding. Nuclear, I think only 2 countries are doing nuclear in Africa, South Africa and Nigeria. I'm not aware of another country that's doing nuclear. So these are really, they try to show us into the future. Talk to us about the roadblocks. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? The risks. I mean, there is so much emphasis, like I said. The risk of how do you finance this vision? You see, for me, that's a very important point. And when you look at this vision, it tells you about, apart from our own resources like oil and gas and stuff like that, they talk about financing from government partners. So we cannot have plans that we expect to be financed from externalities, from exogenous groups. I think we need indigenous capability. Even if we don't have it now, we must be thinking of how do we marshal resources from within. So I think it's a major risk, and I think it's a very, very clear lacuna, again, within this vision on how to make it work, you see. Then the other aspect also, which I consider a very powerful risk, is on how our oil resources will work in an agrarian economy, because we have got benchmarks across the world that show that with infusion of $3 billion that are, for instance, expected according to simulations and math from Economic Policy Research Center every year per annum into our budget, it means that we are going to have real currency appreciation, especially in exchange rates.
We're seeing a little bit
And
of
what
it
would,
right now.
yes,
Strong shilling.
strong. And what would that mean? It will actually mean that our exports are going to be expensive. And most of these exports, Edmund, are agricultural products that do affect farmers. The coffee, the cotton, the flowers, the sugar, and all this stuff. The rice. So it means that the imports are going to be cheaper. What will it mean? It will mean that the rice from Pakistan will flood the market. It will mean that ugali from all these other places
We'll be importing maize.
and therefore there would be no incentive for farmers to continue growing. So unless we push our resources to sectors that we do think should survive,
We'll end up with the so-called Dutch disease.
so we may end up in the Dutch disease. So there are some of the risks that I think we may need to illuminate.
Before we go for the break, Morrison, you mentioned too much emphasis on the hardware, ICT parks, and so on and so forth. Three core areas that people like development experts agree on. You must invest in the people health, education, and the ICT. They mentioned ICT. They don't mention. Do you think health and education have been given a good priority? This year, we have fallen back on the indicators, the MDG goals for the MCH, maternal and child health. Do you think it's been given adequate attention, education, and health?
If the experts didn't mention energy, then they made a mistake, because energy is again a key driver for especially productivity and economic.
Well, talk about too much about health and education.
Yeah.
But I think they emphasize, they do emphasize
Those basic social aspects are very important, especially for human resources and human development. You see, education, health, shelter, and all that stuff. They are key. We must invest in them.
No, I think they're embedded within the vision. If you look at the vision, for example,
Do you feel like they come out poignantly?
well, like I said,
Are they, by the way?
yeah, they are brilliant ideas. Some of them out of touch with our local context. I'm very, very, pessimistic with the financing, where we're going to get money to finance most of those things. But they talk about because one of the vision aspirations is how do we have? They're looking at how we can have the health systems that are more affordable, more accessible, and they're also looking at issues of maternal health. Also, the vision actually, in terms of the visualization, they do acknowledge most of these.
All right, we'll have to go for a break. We'll be back. Of course, when you talk about moving from moving to a service-based industry, that's saying moving from tilling the ground to manning the till, from agriculture to services. This is Spectrum. Already one. We'll be back.
Legitimate whiskey is different. I am proud that we can now enjoy quality and taste. And style too. I have not felt so original with the liveliness I get each morning after I enjoy legitimate whiskey. Everything seems to be going my way. This is a worthy discovery. Legitimate whiskey is blended from carefully selected Scotch malt, giving it a golden amber appearance with a silky smooth and soothing taste for lasting satisfaction. Legitimate whiskey, a masterfully crafted blend, expertly blended, lighter and styled whiskey. Please enjoy responsibly.
Sunlight, it's freshness that stays with you all day. The fragrance that lasts.
Try the new range of Sunlight 2-in-1 washing powders for sensational cleaning and all-day fragrance.
So I'm chilling at home with my crew. The boys are waiting to watch the game on the telly, but the chicks want to go to the beach. So how do we play it? A glance across the room. Eye contact is made. A plan is hatched. Pete will get some sand. Lots of it. Jeff will take care of the deco, Tim the entertainment, and I the clubs. And so we bring the beach to the apartment. If we can't go to the beach, we bring the beach to us. It's just how we do.
It's not about where you're at, it's the difference you bring. Get a fresh take on things. Club is brewed longer for easier drinking, brewed slower for great taste. Club, tastefully different. Not for sale to persons under the age of 18.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Welcome back. This is Spectrum on Radio 1 tonight. Vision 2040. Are Ugandan Youths on board as this ambitious plan is launched? Our guests tonight, Mr. Morrison Rwakakamba, Executive Director of the Agency for Transformation, also an interim supporter. Mr. Ahmed Hadji, Executive Director of the African Youth Development Link. You two will be able to call in and contribute to this discussion. Ahmed, do the youth get good mention in this plan?
Well, I think the plan does recognize that in terms of demography, because it acknowledges that in terms of demography, the young people below the age of 30 are the majority, and for them, they are looking at for us to have an economic miracle, we need to invest in the young people, especially in areas of skills development, like Morrison talks about, in areas of skills development, because you're certain that once you have a demographic dividend, then you're likely to boost like economic growth. But then of course it tries to talk a lot about, because our vision Youth 2062 was actually pushing for key focus, especially in the head start sectors like education, agriculture, and health, and these are the very areas that we felt that better invested on. The young people can try to identify potentials and then map out opportunities and have value addition towards the economy, like what the president is saying. For example, when you look at the emphasis on technology, because it tends to emphasize a lot on intentional efforts towards building human resources, and they're looking at giving us the latest skills. And the bigger question the young people are looking at, are these skills transferable? Here they're trying to map with what has happened in the Asian tigers, and they're looking at adapting systems and structures that can help us in terms of continuous learning and vis-a-vis development. Because the missing concept here was that the education system, if you look at it with its own face, it's not really connecting us towards the job market. We cannot negotiate, we cannot create more opportunities within that area. So there's more emphasis in building a high-tech sort of economy, and the young people do resonate a lot with these innovations. So they're looking at drawing partnerships with foreign universities to set up branches here. They're looking at attracting most of these multinational corporations like Microsoft, Intel, Shell to set up research and development centers there, so that we can nurture hubs and make cars like
innovation hubs.
Like the favorite car Morrison talks about of my career.
The one that we reinvented the wheel and built a car around.
It's exactly the same thing. So in terms of skills development focus, the vision is also articulating that we might need to also focus a lot on expounding on opportunities by creating exchange programs between Ugandan universities and Harvard, Stanford, or these are universities, so that we can share more in terms of competencies and transform that information to build the economy. We're looking at having more to do with mobile health. The young people feel that these are very good ideas, but the willingness to move all these brilliant ideas in terms of action, that's a critical issue. But I think the other issue that I want to touch on, Edmond, before I move on, is the whole aspect of demographic dividend. The vision acknowledges that you have a huge youthful population. That if
I'm born under Museveni, 2/3 of this population.
We are the Museveni generation because it's the only sort of generation we know about.
Yes.
And the vision, it anticipates that for us to have a game changer, which is with oil and the youth, how better you invest in this quality youthful population can turn the economy towards the better, or it can worsen. If you don't invest in the youth, then that means that they can become a curse towards the economy. The cost of lack of engaging the youth, meaning that they can turn, to be violent and what. But the vision do actually acknowledge that for us to have the dividend, we need to reduce on the fertility rates and maximize.
Have fewer babies.
Have fewer babies.
The president is a fan of many babies.
No, actually, the vision is.
It doesn't
The vision says to.
Other people should have many babies.
The vision actually, the vision disconnects with the president's, aspiration.
No, but
hold on, Morrison, because the vision says that in the next 30 years we should have reduced from 3.2% to 2.4%, meaning that you
The
focus.
population growth, that's still high.
That's their benchmark. That's what they're hitting at.
8 percentage points, that's very low.
So they're saying that you would rather have a lower population,
80
invest
basis
intentionally in that population, create more skills opportunities, more hubs in terms of ICT, then that means that these individuals will have more employment opportunities, they will be saving more, and then the economy can get more taxes. It's very, it's so much of dreaming and...
Okay. We'll get back to that in a short while. Morris, could you talk to us, Morrison, about the values? Does the plan address values?
No, like I said, I think it's
Miniskirts and other things. Broaden it. All values, not just miniskirts.
no, the values I'm really talking about are not related to some of these, miniskirt scheme. I don't believe that. I never used to think that the Ministry of Ethics and Integrity was important until when I delved into these issues of visioning and planning and transformation and realized that it's a key strategic ministry. One that made perhaps the occupant is busy investing in issues like miniskirts and others that are not quite strategic. But I think the values that we should be marketing all over the place, values like of patriotism, values of hard work, values of seriousness, values of pure generosity, values of common sense of nationalism, those values that bring us together as a country, and we believe that we can achieve together.
Do you have those values?
And I understand that there was certain strategic plan on ethics and core values. I don't know where it ended up. I haven't looked at what it talks about. But for me, who markets these values? Who
are priests in a certain
who should be leading this kind of it should really be the leadership, Edmond. And because you see, people get to learn these values not just through speeches, but most times it is really through actions of the leaders, whether they are priests, whether they are LCs. You talked about United States, you talked about Singapore, let me talk to you about a value which Lee Kuan Yew,
I'm a very good admirer of
did actualize in Singapore. It was very dirty. People would go spitting all over the place in the city.
What did he say?
No, he said Singapore can never be like that. He said spitting is not part of our value system. We should stop it. And after that, tourists started going to Singapore because we are no longer spitting all over the place. So we need to start with small things like that.
Marketed, no wearing
mannerism. They do
no wearing slippers in the town, in the West. So those are basic things. But you've underscored an important point, their values. Somebody said to a preacher that if your values are wrong or your character is wrong, they will tell you, we can, what you are speaking so loudly, we can hardly hear what you're saying.
Hard work, how many hours do Ugandans work?
No, but I think related to the value component, you might have very good ideas, you might have very good policies, but then
if the values are wrong,
if the leadership is not connecting with the values,
you can't go far.
We can't move much because somewhere somehow, for example, I've looked at the vision and it talks about building a comprehensive national service program. I think they're calling it Wananchi Ujenga Taifa, something like that, where we are looking at how do we build patriotism, how do we
I think we've made it very clear. Let's talk about practically pragmatism of it. How have we embarked on this, very briefly?
In terms of what?
Have we embarked on this Vision 2040? Are we walking there, or is there this one? We've not yet got out of a plane.
Well, it's still an ambitious journey that we've
Are we connected? Have we started? 1,000 miles can begin with a single step. Have we made that first step?
Well, we need to appreciate that there's so many unfinished businesses that we might.
Let's talk about the NDP. 5 years, it's 2 years. We are 2 years into it. Have we even begun on the NDP?
No, but of course there's an ongoing review of the National Development Plan, and it's really pathetic that you have a few indicators out of so many indicators. The other time, the chairperson, Kisamba Mugera, was really put to task to explain as to why, out of so many monies that were injected in the National Development Plan, we managed to achieve about 2 indicators. So that means that we have a long journey to take on. So why is it that you're bringing another vision, yet the National Development Plan, which is ideally the development framework that is supposed to articulate what sort of direction we're supposed to take as a country, how we get there, and the leadership to that? Because if you do not appreciate this process itself, the National Development Plan, give it much more financing, recognition. Because, for example, NPA had issues to be recognized. Initially
they are struggling as a body.
They are struggling as a body, because
they can't get it.
They didn't have a home till recent that they are now recognized, but they've always been under
but they're still under the Ministry of Finance.
Under the Ministry of Finance. So there are these battles of they want to be semi-autonomous as a planning machinery. So I think Uganda as a country can appreciate that we have good plans, we have the good brains, we have the good advisors. But the whole point to invest in our brains, the whole point to move all these ideas into action is something that is lacking. And if we don't get that, I don't see this vision going far.
Somebody said we develop good visions that they are improved in Tanzania and implemented in Rwanda. I don't know whether that is accurate or not, but it might give us an indication. Morrison, can we achieve that vision with the current levels of corruption?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that also talks to values, it talks to the integrity, it talks about how far we have gone into fighting this corruption. So certainly for us to move forward, the cancer of corruption, it has to really be managed, it has to be put to less than 2%, moving on to 0.
What is the level now?
Well,
40%.
Well, Transparency International and all some of these reports have got different figures. But if you, again, benchmarking into countries that have leapfrogged, China, Singapore, almost all those countries, corruption was almost at 0. Maybe the difference is countries where, in places like Qatar that had a lot of oil and gas resources and could just move forward and a small population. But otherwise, the various systems. And those various systems are bedecked within a bureaucracy. Even for us to succeed for Vision 2040, we need a strong bureaucracy. You see, in China, if people move from, like LC1 in Communist Party to get to the national, you would have really been, I think in my language you call it thieved, you see, and you're pure, you're Puritan. So you need a bureaucracy that is made up of Puritans who are aligned to the vision and who wake up every day to go and try and achieve it.
That's very idealistic.
Yeah, and there is another point really that people mentioned here about this, the governance within the ministries, within the deploying centers of this plan, the implementers. There is still really a lot of duplication. You find struggles and fights between NADS and the ministry. For instance, NADS and the Ministry of Agriculture. You have NPA having difficulties working with the Ministry of Finance. Who does what at what time? Who delivers what? You see, for me, that kind of governance within our bureaucracy that deploys this plan should really be resolved. So there are certain benchmarks that have to. But the other key question which you asked, are we moving forward? Have we started? If you look at our budget architecture, it also smacks of some problems really. Because if you're talking about achieving, universal, where mortality rates and whatever are doing well, schools are doing well, then you need to look at the MTF, the medium-term framework paper, and see, are we putting money? Is our budget talking to the National Development Plan? Is our budget talking to the Vision 2040? And where we are putting money, I think we haven't really started seriously on that journey. In some aspects, like roads and infrastructure and energy, I think they are moving fine. But on some of these social expense-related sectors, like health and education, I think we really need to be quite even more serious.
We have to listen. Let's hear from the callers. This is on Radio 1.
Our number 0414 348 111 0312 260 390.
031226139. As the lines are being rectified, you fault with them apparently. Let's continue.
I think I'm just going to pick out, because there is something that Morrison talked about, especially the governance deficiencies. You realize that you have the National Planning Authority.
The lines are open now. You can call in 0414-348-111, 031226039, 031226139. Yes.
You have the National Planning Authority, which is ideally, the leading as far as our planning machinery is concerned. But most of these guys have issues with the different sectors. Different sectors come up with plans that do not align to the National Development Plan, and there are haggles related to recognition of National Planning Authority as one of the lead agencies to push us in as far.
How should we do it? What should we do? Should we give them?
I think we need to, like you said, we need to creating another ministry that is more additional expensive.
Someone has spoken about splitting the finance.
No,
I think we need to just
In Kenya,
recognize them
it's
as a
almost become a disaster.
semi-autonomous.
look at our current budget
Of
expenditure.
course, we
How
can't
many-
create another Ministry of Planning altogether to detach it from Ministry of
In
Finance.
Kenya, it almost became.
But there are things we need to, at least we should push for us to move this vision from a point A to point Z, wherever we want it to go. We need to acknowledge that all these sectoral plans and all these,
should be aligned.
should be aligned with the National Development Plan.
What do we do?
There should be harmony. There
Give them
should be
a tall tower in
coordination.
town or what?
But we need to going forward. We need
How
to.
should we get them some respect, to put it plainly?
Let's give them a semi-autonomous entity, because they are haggling within the ministry itself. How do you expect them to move this vision?
All right, Spectrum, hello.
Their business is to plan.
To plan.
Hello, brother listener.
Respected.
Minister of Kenya, you're welcome. Spectrum, hello. That's a very good question from Church Ambrose Bukanya. You underscored part of it earlier, called the breadth of consultation, Morrison.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we talked about, that for a plan to survive and to achieve the test of time, it must be consensus driven and it must be bottom up, and all stakeholders should really be involved. And like I said, it goes beyond any political term, it goes beyond anyone's even lifetime. So
You spoke about, before I come to you spoke about patriotism as one of the values. Is that something that you should teach on a blackboard? Like in a home, you tell children you should love your father. You bring out a chalkboard and
it's a combination of two. One is
Can you teach patriotism?
It's the actions, but also it's a clear documentation of our history, of our heroism, of our past. When you see what rallies America, it's what happened in Normandy. It is what happened in Kaisan. It is how they struggled for their independence. So it should be the same story. What happened in Luwero, the revolutions that we have. That kind of documentation, that sense of history is very, very important to invoke in us a spirit of patriotism, a spirit of progress, but also the actions of the leaders, both past and the present and the future leaders, is also the biggest lesson, is also the biggest inspiration to, that would drive patriotism, certainly.
Edgar? Yes.
Which one is that?
Expelled members of parliament. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we'll talk about about that on Edgar, I think we'll talk about it on another occasion. We'll talk about the expelled MPs some other time, including about the SDF. We don't know whether it's still on the books or it's somewhere else. Morrison.
I wanted to touch on
Okay, Ahmed, let's hear from you. You're still underscoring a point. Forget you, Ahmed.
No, it's okay.
The other thing that I also wanted to touch on, I strongly believe that values are not taught. We need to be seen to.
You can't teach patriotism.
No, you can't wake up one day. For example, the vision actually emphasizes that we will compulsorily send people to do a national service program as a precondition for you to get a job, as a precondition for you to qualify to enter into university, for you to take up leadership. You cannot force me to love my country.
Really?
You know, the actions that I see out there, the leadership.
But you're wrong. Teaching is not forcing.
You can't wake
Can
up.
you teach a man to love a woman?
Can you teach me to love my wife?
Yeah, sometimes.
No, for us, actually,
The teachers ask about love.
one of the things that come out in
The Bible does, and the Quran talks about love.
I read the Quran. Do you read the Quran?
Hello. Good evening, sir. Your name? Yes, Peter. Children per woman. We're actually one of the top 10.
I certainly agree with him. I agree with him 100%. Because when the young people were consulted on what sort of Uganda they wanted to see, they were very clear that they wanted to be employed, because they believe that once they get that opportunity to be able to put their skills into actions, the right skills into actions, they would be able to contribute towards the national development of this country. But I entirely agree, because if you look at the whole landscape, the economic development landscape, the regulator here, who is the government, has left, have thrown the young people into the market. There are less intentional, efforts to absorb most of these young people, to prepare them in the first place with the right skill sets, to be able to compete favorably, because the spirit of this vision is to allow that competitiveness, because we need to enhance our economies, grow our GDP wherever. But you're looking at a huge population that you're not giving intentional focus and attention in terms of preparing them, in terms of linking them to space opportunities where they can put their actions into. I want to contribute towards this economy, but you have a situation where you're just throwing them to the market and then letting the private sector to take lead. Where is the role of government here?
All right, Morrison, is the government think about employment? Are we not over politicized when we chase vendors from the streets? Next, we chase news vendors and distributors from the street. Are we thinking about employment? When employed youth on the street,
I differ a bit.
When we send beggars off the street, does that agree with the values?
I differ a bit from that, and Peter Wamboga, who just called him, because I don't think it's very much. It's the business of government to stimulate growth in the productive sectors of the economy, stimulate and even give incentives to private sector to be able to create jobs, and even investment into education, into skills development, into BTV. If it works, it's about creating a population that is skilled enough that would be able to create jobs and multiply jobs in the economy. All over the world, few governments are not supposed to be a place where many people are employed. This is why we are advocating for lean governments.
But they are supposed to serve the environment.
I ask that you let me speak.
Go on.
That's why you see governments like in Kenya and other places are even cutting ministries, are cutting on the bureaucracy. to make sure that it is more efficient, and then it is directing resources into sectors, whether it is the road sectors that would employ a lot of people, working on the railways that would employ a lot of people, creating, making sure that universities have enough resources to create Silicon Valleys of this world, and such that people who can do things like Facebook and Ugandans can do something else and create millions of jobs across the world can happen here. So for me, the role of government is regulation and stimulation, whereby it should invest resources where they are supposed to be. But I want to speak about also the
regulation and stimulation.
The other thing is, before we go, is this lacuna also within this plan is on proper manage. How are we going to manage the environment? Because if you deploy resources to work on roads, to exploit oil and gas, to put all these centers across the country, how about environmental concerns? You see, how are you going to manage? So there is also a lacuna in how we are going to do disposal management, and environmental management across the board. I think it should really be infused.
No, I think when you say that the role of the government should only be limited towards regulation and stimulation, you realize that government has a constitutional responsibility to create an environment that is stable, secure, you and me.
That's what I'm
so you can live a social,
different.
just economy.
It's not different.
In a situation where you have a huge population, you yourself belong to this generation.
You need stability.
And then you need stability. That
Young
means that
people
at
doing
a
some
particular
work.
point you need to set up certain infrastructures, like for example the youth fund and most of these. So young people can tap onto the credit and invest in your agriculture that you really, really would love to see.
Thank you very much.
Government has a responsibility.
Quality of operation is for me really what we should focus on.
We have to go. Thank you
We
very
can
much.
have a big population that is quality. What's wrong with that?
We have to go. Of course, that probably is the better. Whether you can have it, which you can have it at the same time. Thank you very much, Morrison Rwakakamba, Executive Director of the Agents for Transformation. Thank you for coming, Spectrum. Mr. Ahmed Hadji, Executive Director of the African Youth Development. Link, thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond. This is Spectrum. We'll be back tomorrow.
There are those who sit around waiting for things to happen. But then there are those